Okay, let's talk about arrays with files, specifically these two questions. If we have a data file, how can we read from that file into an array? And then our next challenge will be, well, if we have an array in our main, how can we write that data into a file? So let's look at both of these questions. Let's start with reading from a file. Okay, let's talk about reading from a file. Here is our file. It's got these 5 values into it. And our challenge is bring those files into our program and into an array. Okay, so let's go. Line 1 here, we're just establishing a constant of size 5 there, SZ. Line 2 is our input file object. We're creating it as fin. Line 3 is, given that we know the number of records, let's create our array of that size. So here's our array of type integer named records of size 5. Now we're going to need a counter here because we have an array requiring an index. And in this case, I'm not going to use a for loop. I'm going to use the special while loop extractor to extract these records. So we'll need an index here. Now let's look at the for loop. This while loop is the special constructor. It's that extractor that'll keep on going as long as there are values to process. So the first time through the loop, I is 0. So it's going to extract something here while fin, these operators here are going to extract this very first number, 16, and put it in records sub 0 because I is 0. So that 16 then goes right over to here. The next time through the loop, I is 1. It extracts 32. It goes into record sub 1, which is now here, 32, and you get the idea. Every time through that while loop, really the only thing that we have to do, since the extraction is happening and since the assignment is automatically happening also, all we have to do is to increment I here with I++. So pretty straightforward. However, it's even easier than that. Let me show you another way to tighten up this code. So rather than having this I++ statement in the for loop, we could just actually move that into the header here and say fin extractor records I++. And what that does is it first returns I, so whatever I currently is, that's what the processor will use. And then when that's done, it'll go ahead and increment I after that read operation is done. So that would then make that entire line look like this. Note the while loop header now is very compact. Also note that the while loop header is terminated by a semicolon, and that's saying that there is essentially nothing to do inside this while loop because all the actions happening in the header. So we'll remember this trick here for reading from a file. Otherwise, we could easily use a for loop, and let me just kind of show what that might look like. The for loop's pretty simple. We're just going to go from 0 to size, and we'll have this exact same syntax that we had in the while loop extractor. We're just going to have it with just the statement isolated, fin into records, and that's all you need. From there, then, you will have a properly populated array with that data. And then, of course, since we're not heathens, we always close that which we open, and we make sure to use fin.close for any file that we open. Here's now writing to a file. And we know how to traverse an array with a for loop and output that to the console. So we'll employ the same strategy for outputting to a file. We'll just use a FOUT instead of a COUT. So here we've got a sales array declared of size 5, and it's got an initialization sequence there, 5 integers. And then there's our output object FOUT, and that's bound to output.txt. And here's the code we'd use. Same for loop, using a header going from 0 to size. And we will just output sales sub I. That'll just traverse the entire array, one element at a time. And we will send that output to the FOUT object. We will stream that output to the FOUT object, which is defined as an output file, out.txt. All right, I hope this helps with writing to a file and reading from a file. Let's take a look at some code next. And on to some coding. Let's start with an array that we want to get its data from a file. So let's do fstream here. Let's create a data file over here. We'll call it in.txt. And let's give it a couple of values. And it can be anything. Let's just do those 5 values. We know there's 5, so I'm going to do a constant for 5. And let's create that integer array. Let's call it, let's see. How about the number of workplace accidents per week? So let's call it accidents. And it will be of size SZ. And now our job is to read from the input file. So let's create that input file object. And there's in.txt. And remember, since we're not heathens, we close that which we open because we make our beds and we line up. So let's start. Let's get those numbers. And I'm going to just use that special while loop extractor to start. And that means we do need a counter. So I'll just call it int count. And then here's the extractor in action. While fin is reading into accidents sub count. And that's all we need to do. At that point, we're done with the file and we can close it and do some more operations now. Let's run this and we should get no errors. We won't get any output, of course, because we haven't told it to do anything, but we did get no errors. So that's showing that this was successful. Of course, to prove it, let's go ahead now and output the contents of the accidents array to just validate that we had a successful data population. So let's do a for loop. And let's just output accidents sub I along with a space. And then after the for loop is done, we'll then do an end line. And sure enough, our data did make it into that array successfully. So this simple while loop is all we need to just go boom, put it into the array in one statement. But remember, it does require this separate counter variable because we've got to have something to index the array, some index number to use in the array. So now we could easily reformat this as a for loop. And let's do that. I'm going to just sort of do a brand new for loop. We won't need an index in this case, a separate index variable, because we're going to use I as the for loop's built-in index. So this will just traverse through that whole array. And let's do a fin. And whatever then is extracted is going to go into the accidents array into element I. Let's run this now, and you'll see we'll get the same output. Yep, there it is. And this is the for loop method of reading from a file into an array. And then once we have that in an array, we can do whatever array type stuff we want to do. Let's next take a look at how to write to a file. Let's say we have a populated array that we've made, and let's now write that to a file. Here's a framework of our code that's going to output to a file. We'll use the same constant here in line 5. Here's our FOUT object. Here's our accidents array, and note that I am providing an initialization list. And because of that, I don't need to put a size declarator here. The processor is smart enough to count up the number of elements here and just to create an array of that exact size. So that's why it's optional in this particular case to put a size declarator there. Now our job is we want to write this to a file. So let's do a standard for loop, I equals 0, I less than size. And then let's just figure out, well, what do we write here? Well, we want it to go to the file, so we'll start with FOUT. And then we're just going to output the array element. So the array name is accidents. And we access each individual element through the index I that we're getting for free from the for loop. And then let's go ahead and put the end line character in there. Then we will we'll FOUT the end line just to put one extra return in there. And then let's tell the user of this program some feedback. So here we're saying, okay, process is complete. The user's got some feedback. We didn't see the read operation happening, but it's nice to give the user some direct feedback. So let's take a look at this out.txt, and there are our values, 13, 12, 9, 15, 13, just like we said. So that is writing to a file. I will post both of these REPLs in right below this particular video, so please check those out.